My life runs on a timetable measured in beeps, medication schedules, and the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. The hospital is its own self-contained universe, and I, Ella, am one of its quiet, orbiting moons. I find a strange comfort in the order of it all, the precise way a bed is made, the sterile scent of antiseptic clinging to my scrubs, the predictable rhythm of my shifts. I'm a good nurse because I'm a good observer. I notice the subtle things, the tremor in a patient's hand as they reach for water, the flicker of fear in their eyes that a brave smile can't quite hide. I see, I record, I care, and then I go home to my quiet apartment and my books. Then came the girl in room 308. Her chart said Diane, 24, admitted for a fractured tibia after a fall. Simple enough. But when I stood before her, chart in hand, nothing felt simple. She was propped against a mountain of starched white pillows, and the first thing that struck me was her hair, a wild, messy cascade of jet black against all that sterile white. Her face was pale, with sharp, intelligent features and high cheekbones that seemed carved from alabaster. But it was her eyes that held me. Deep, clear gray, like a stormy sea, fixed on the ceiling as if she were mapping constellations there. Most patients, in their first few hours, have a constellation of their own around them. Worried family, anxious friends, a flurry of flowers and cards. Her room was bare. No flowers, no cards, no one in the stiff visitor's chair by the window. She was an island, complete, contained in her solitude. Over the first day, I did my rounds. I checked her vitals, adjusted her drip, and asked the standard questions in my practiced, gentle tone. She answered with a voice surprisingly low and smooth, a little rough around the edges from pain but steady. She never complained. She just watched me with those unsettlingly direct gray eyes, as if she were the one observing me. I felt my professional calm fray at the edges, replaced by a current of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or a kind of recognition. I, too, knew a thing or two about being an island. The pull toward room 308 became a silent, gravitational force in my shifts. I'd find reasons to be there that weren't strictly on the schedule. Her water pitcher needed refilling. Even if it was half full, her pillows could use more fluffing. The sunlight through the blinds might be in her eyes. They were flimsy excuses, I knew, but they let me step back into the quiet orbit of her room. She spent her time reading, worn paperbacks with cracked spines pulled from a small duffel bag on the floor. She never watched the blaring television bolted to the wall. That alone set her apart. One afternoon, I came in to check her for. The room was quiet except for the rustle of a turning page. "How's the pain today, Diane?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She looked up from her book, gaze sharp and clear. "It's a bore," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. "But I've had worse." It wasn't a bid for pity, just a statement of fact. We fell silent as I adjusted the drip rate. Her arm was slender, her skin cool under my fingertips. I noticed a small, faded scar near her wrist, a pale, white line against her skin. My fingers lingered a fraction of a second too long, and I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. "You like to read?" I said, gesturing to the book in her lap. It was a clumsy attempt to fill the silence. "It's better than staring at the ceiling," she replied, her eyes finding mine again. "Keeps the ghosts at bay." That night, before I left for home, I did something I'd never done before. I walked down to the small, dusty hospital library in the basement and found a novel I loved, one about a woman who finds herself on a remote island. It felt appropriate. The next morning, I placed it on her bedside table before she woke up. No note, no explanation. Later that day, when I came in to take her blood pressure, her old book lay on the floor and mine was open in her hands. She gave me a small, slow nod. It was enough. The book became an unspoken bridge between us. After that, our conversation stretched, filling the quiet of her room. We never talked about heavy things, just books, the hospital's terrible coffee, the funny way one of the older doctors walked. I learned her humor was dry and sharp, a shield she used expertly. In turn, I found myself talking more than usual, my natural shyness fading in her presence. One weekend, I baked. I'm not much of a cook, but I make decent lemon bars, tart and sweet, with a buttery shortbread crust. On Monday, I packed a few into a small plastic container and brought them with me. Setting them on her bedside table felt like a ridiculously grand gesture, my heart thumping like a nervous teenager's. "What's this?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "They're just lemon bars," I mumbled, busying myself with her chart. "I made too many." A blatant lie. She picked one up, examining it with mock seriousness. She took a bite, and her eyes closed for a moment. A genuine, unguarded smile spread across her face, transforming her from merely striking to truly beautiful. "Wow," she said, soft. "These are really good, Ella." It was the first time she'd used my name. It sounded different coming from her, less like a name tag, more like a secret. It was during one of those afternoons, lulled by the hospital's quiet hum and the scent of lemon, that she told me about her past. She was talking about a town she'd lived in as a kid, and I asked about her parents. She shrugged, gaze fixed on the window. "Never knew them. I was a product of the system, foster homes, group homes. A well-cared-for orphan, if you believe the brochures." She said it so plainly, no self-pity, that it hit me like a physical blow. Her solitude wasn't temporary. It was the foundation of her life. In that moment, my quiet compassion deepened into a fierce, protective ache I couldn't name. I came in on a Wednesday morning, Tupperware in my bag with fresh lemon bars, and the first thing I noticed was room 308's open door. Inside, a cleaning lady wiped down an empty bed, the mattress stripped bare. The air smelled of bleach, sharp, erasing. My steps faltered. The room was just a room again, a sterile box. The island was gone. Looking for the patient from 308th? Mary, another nurse, called from down the hall. "She discharged an hour ago." Dr. Evans was pleased with her progress. "Oh," I said, the words small and hollow in the busy corridor. "Good. That's good." I spotted something on the windowsill then, a crumpled piece of paper. I crossed the room and picked it up. It was Diane's handwriting, messy but clear. "Ella, thanks for the book, the lemon bars, and the quiet. I wanted to say goodbye, but you were with Mr. Hale in 312. I'll return the Tupperware. Promise." My throat tightened. I'd been with Mr. Hale, yes, his oxygen had dropped, and I'd lost track of time. I'd missed her. I went about my duties the rest of the day in a fog. Every time I passed the empty room, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. I told myself it was normal growing fond of a patient, then them leaving. But this felt different, like a color had been erased from my world, leaving everything in gray. The hospital, once my ordered sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The silence from 308 was louder than any alarm. We'd known each other just over a week, but the void she left was vast. That night, the lemon bars sat untouched on my counter. A few days passed, and the sharpness of her absence dulled into a low, persistent ache. I settled back into my routine, the hospital's rhythm reclaiming me. I told myself I'd forget the girl with stormy gray eyes and a wry smile. Then, on a Friday afternoon, as I charted at the nurse's station, a flash of color caught my eye. I looked up, and there she was. Diane. She leaned against the counter, no longer in a drab hospital gown but in jeans and a brilliant cobalt blue sweater that made her eyes look almost electric. She stood on her own 2 feet, a slight limp the only trace of her injury. Her hair fell in dark waves around her shoulders. She looked healthy, vibrant, and completely out of place. My pen froze over the chart. She offered a small, almost shy smile. "Hey, nurse." "Diane," I breathed, barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Official business," she said, and with a flourish, pulled my Tupperware from her tote bag. "I believe this is yours. Can't steal from my favorite caregiver." She nodded at the paper in my hand, the one I'd tucked into my scrub pocket that morning. "And I saw you had my note. Sorry I bailed without saying goodbye." My hand shook slightly as I reached for the Tupperware. Our fingers brushed, and for a second, her fingertips rested on my skin, warm, solid. A jolt, sharp and sweet, shot at my arm. It was over in an instant, but the feeling lingered, making my cheeks flush. "Thank you," I said, voice strained. "No," she said, gaze steady. "Thank you for the books, the lemon bars, the way you didn't treat me like a project." She held my eyes for a long moment, a silent conversation that had nothing to do with baked goods. And I knew, with a certainty that thrilled and terrified me, this wasn't a goodbye. "You know," Diane said, casual as she leaned against the counter, "lemon bars probably taste even better outside a hospital. We should test that theory sometime. Coffee, too." The invitation hung between us, simple, direct. My heart flipped. Being friends with a patient within the hospital's safe boundaries was one thing, stepping outside them was another. But the thought of never seeing her again was unbearable. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Yes." We met that Saturday at a small downtown cafe, mismatched chairs, the rich scent of roasted coffee. Seeing her in the real world was a revelation, more alive, gestures broader, laughter echoing in the noisy room. She talked about her job as a freelance graphic designer, her love for old black and white movies, her dream of traveling to see the Northern Lights. I, in contrast, felt like a pale version of myself. Without my scrubs as armor, I was just Ella, a quiet girl with not much to say. But Diane didn't mind. She listened, asking questions that made me feel seen, drawing out stories I didn't know I had. The time I'd adopted a stray cat in college, the way I'd learned to bake lemon bars from my grandmother. After coffee, we walked through a nearby park. The autumn air was crisp, golden leaves crunching under our feet. On a crowded path, she placed a hand on the small of my back to guide me, light, impersonal on the surface, but sending heat through my coat. Later, by a pond watching ducks, our arms brushed. I didn't pull away. I leaned in, subtly, a silent admission. Shame flickered. Was I being too eager? But it faded into quiet excitement. This was new, and for the first time in years, I didn't mind being a little lost. Our Saturdays became a fixture. We explored tiny bookstores, walked along the river, spent an afternoon at the art museum arguing playfully about which paintings we'd borrow if we were thieves. With each meeting, the space between us shrank, not just physically but emotionally. I learned to read the subtle shifts in her expression, to spot the vulnerability she hid behind confidence. She, in turn, understood my silences, never pushing me to speak, but letting me just be. One rainy evening, we ended up at my apartment, soaked from a sudden downpour. I made tea, and we sat on my small sofa, wrapped in blankets, listening to rain drum on the windows. The room glowed with soft light, an intimacy that felt both comfortable and charged. I was telling her about a hard day at work. An elderly patient I'd grown close to had been transferred to a long-term care facility, and I trailed off, lost in thought. The silence wasn't empty. I was acutely aware of her warmth beside me, the mix of rain and her shampoo in the air. I glanced at her, and she was already looking at me. Her expression was unreadable, gray eyes dark in the dim light. Slowly, she shifted on the couch, closing the small gap between us. Our knees touched. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her movement was a question, wordless. My breath caught. I didn't move away. I couldn't. It was as if my body had been waiting for this since the first day I'd seen her in that sterile hospital room. The world narrowed to the inches between us. Rain faded to a murmur. All I heard was my heart, frantic and hopeful. Diane's gaze dropped from my eyes to my lips, a silent declaration that made the air crackle. Calm settled over me, acceptance of something I'd been fighting. She leaned in, movements fluid, sure. No hesitation. Her lips met mine. It wasn't dramatic, not like a movie. It was quiet, soft, profoundly real, a question and an answer. Confirmation of every unspoken word, every lingering glance, every accidental touch. For a suspended moment, the universe felt contained in that single connection. My mind went blank, anxieties melting into the truth of the feeling. Warmth washed over me, like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been searching for. After a second that felt like an eternity, I responded, a quiet shift, my own acceptance. When we pulled back, it was only a few inches. Her gray eyes searched mine, and I saw it, raw vulnerability, mirroring my own. We didn't speak. There were no words for what had passed between us. In the stillness of my apartment, rain whispering against the glass, a new silence settled. Not one of absence, but of shared, breathtaking presence. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Pale sunlight streamed through my window, illuminating dust motes. The world looked washed clean new. I felt it too, a quiet, fundamental shift. The walls I'd built around myself hadn't been torn down. They'd dissolved. We met for coffee the next weekend, our usual cafe. Everything was the same, the coffee scent, mismatched chairs, low hum of conversation, but nothing was the same. The space between us wasn't charged with unspoken questions. It was filled with easy intimacy. Diane was telling a story, hands gesturing animatedly, and when she laughed, it was pure, open. She caught me watching, and her smile softened. She reached across the table, fingers covering mine. Not tentative, but sure. A statement. A promise. I looked down at our hands, her warmth against mine, then back at her face. For years, my life had been a straight, predictable line on sterile graph paper. Diane had taken a pen and drawn a beautiful, unexpected curve, one leading to a place I'd never imagined. I was still a quiet observer, but no longer on the outside looking in. I was part of the picture now. The future was a blank page, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to help write what came next.